let's turn to Matthew 17. Matthew 17. And after 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John, his brother, and led him up a high mountain by themselves, and he was transfigured before them. And his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became white as a light. And behold, there appeared to them Moses and Elijah talking with them. And Peter said to Jesus, Lord, it is good that we are here. If you wish, I will make 3 tents here, one for you, and one for Moses, and one for Elijah. He was still speaking when, behold, a bright cloud overshadowed them. And a voice from the cloud said, This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him. When the disciples heard this, they fell on their faces and were terrified. But Jesus came and touched them, saying, Rise and have no fear. And when they lifted up their eyes, they saw no one but Jesus only. And as they were coming down the mountain, Jesus commanded them, Tell no one the vision until the Son of Man is raised from the dead. And the disciples asked him, Then why do the scribes say that first Elijah must come? He answered, Elijah does come, and he will restore all things. But I tell you that Elijah has already come, and they did not recognize him, but did to him whatever they pleased. So also the Son of Man will certainly suffer at their hand. Then the disciples understood that he was speaking to them of John the Baptist. So today we're going to talk about the trips to a transfiguration. Before we actually go on, we will just take a look at the same event that recorded in other books. So let's turn to Mark chapter 9. Mark chapter 9. Mark chapter 9 from verse 2. And after 6 days, Jesus took with them Peter and James and John and led them up a high mountain of himself, and he was transfigured before them. And his clothes became radiant, intensely white, as no one on earth could bleach them. And there appeared to them Elijah with Moses, and they were talking with Jesus. And Peter said to Jesus, Rabbi, it is good that we are here. Let us make 3 tents, one for you, and one for Moses, and one for Elijah. For he did not know what to say, for they were terrified, and a cloud overshadowed them, and a voice came out of the cloud, This is my beloved Son, listen to him. And suddenly, looking around, they no longer saw anyone with them but Jesus only. And as they were coming down from the mountain, he charged them to tell no one what they had seen until the Son of Man had risen from the dead. So they kept the matter to themselves, questioning what this rising from the dead might mean. And they asked him, Why do the scribes say that first Elijah must come? And he said to them, Elijah does come first to restore all things. And how is it written of the Son of Man that he should suffer many things and be treated with contempt? But I tell you that Elijah has come, and they did to him whatever they pleased, as it is written of him. We'll look at one more section. This time we'll go to Luke chapter 9. Luke chapter 9. We're going to read from verse 28. Now, about 8 days after these things, he took with him Peter and John, James, and went up on the mountain to pray. And as he was praying, the appearance of his face was altered, and his clothing became dazzling white. And behold, two men were talking with him, Moses and Elijah, who appeared in glory and spoke of his departure, which he was about to accomplish at Jerusalem. Now Peter and those who were with him were heavy with sleep, but when they became fully awake, they saw his glory and the two men who stood with him. And as the men were parting from him, Peter said to Jesus, Master, it is good that we are here. Let us make 3 tents, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. Not knowing what he said, he was saying these things. A cloud came and overshadowed them, and they were afraid as they entered the cloud. And a voice came out of the cloud saying, This is my son, my chosen one. Listen to him. And when the voice had spoken, Jesus was found alone. And they kept silence and told no one in those days anything of what they had seen. So it's the same event recorded in a different books, and it's very similar story, but slightly it actually says a little bit different from each other. But one of the things that we have to note here is that when you look at the book of Matthew and book of Mark and Luke, as it starts, Matthew and Mark, it starts with, and after 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John, his brother. When you actually go to Mark chapter 9, it's a very similar story. It says, after 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John and led him up a high mountain by himself. But when you turn to Mark chapter 9, Luke chapter 9, Luke actually reports a slightly different, because when you turn to chapter 9 of the book of Luke, it says, Now about 8 days after these saying. So Matthew and Mark talks about 6 days. Luke talks about 8 days. So now people saying, aha, there is mismatch. And it says something different from, one book from the other, which means it actually points out there's a flaw in the Bible because they recorded something different. To respond to the people who questioning this accuracy of the Bible, first of all, Matthew and Mark, as I mentioned, book of Mark was actually recorded at first, and then Matthew literally referenced the book of Mark to write the book of Matthew. So when you look at the book of Matthew and Mark, you will find almost close to 90% of the stories are the same. That's why you will see many of the pastors cover either Matthew or Mark. They don't cover two books because it's almost identical. There's no point of actually, saying the same story over and over again. So they usually cover either Matthew or Mark. That's why that they do that, because there's so much of a similarity between two books. Matthew and Mark did not say 6 days from what. There's no from what. It's just 6 days, about 6 days. It doesn't say 6 days from what. Didn't say. Only book of Luke says, now about 8 days after these sayings, meaning that when Jesus spoke to his disciples at the Caesarea. That's when he spoke to his disciples, and then from 8 days later, this happened. But Matthew and Mark does not say when that 6 days really just mean. So it does not say anything about discrepancies or differences between book to book. I just wanted to point it out. So coming back, Matthew chapter 17, after 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John, his brother. What you will find is in the four Gospels, Jesus actually treated Peter, James, and John somewhat differently than the rest of the disciples. There are places where Jesus took these three disciples in different places. And throughout the Bible, it mentioned it. Jesus truly took care of these three disciples. And then they went up to the Mount of Transfiguration. Now, in Israel today, if you're going to visit that one point, we plan to really just visit Israel at one point. We don't know when, but if we ever do, there's a place called Mount of Transfiguration. And then I guess we're going to go up there, and there is actually the Church of a Transfiguration when you go up there. So you will get to see, you will take a lot of pictures. Wow, this is great. This is exactly what happened. This is where the Peters and James and John saw Jesus was turning himself into a really brightly white, clothes. So we'll just we talk about the stories and great. Now, is this the true mountain? The Transfiguration's mountain is the mountain that disciples and Jesus went up? That is the question. We don't know. Someone decided that the Mount of Transfiguration, this is the mountain that Jesus and his disciples must have went up. But is this the true Transfiguration mountain? Nobody knows. So please do not, when we ever go to Israel and people say, oh, this is what happened. Maybe. But we don't know. First of all, there are two possibilities. Some scholars say this Transfiguration mountain is actually Mount Hermon. Some say, no, that's not Mount of Hermon, but instead, this mountain is Mount of Tabor. Okay, so which mountain is the Transfiguration mountain? Nobody knows. Nobody knows. So do not take things literally when we ever go to Israel. They say, well, this is what happened. Yeah, maybe. What you will also find is when we actually go to Jerusalem and, the path to where Jesus was crucified, right? And we will get to see the place. There's a big rock with the palm of hand was engraved into the stone. We will see it. It's covered with the bronze, right? And what is it? This is when Jesus was carrying the cross, and then when he fell, he touched that stones, and then his palm was engraved into the stones. So many scholars and many pastors and father who comes and kissed at the stones and say, oh, this is the holy place where Jesus' hands was touched. I go oh Lord. This is the types of things that people do, right? Yeah, it's great that you actually think of Jesus as, who fell and for us and carried a cross, but let's not just make it too, you know, um, elaborate things that didn't exist, or just make things as like as if this is real. There are a lot of things are not real, but they actually just make it as a place that it's like it's real. So don't get mixed up with what you see in Israel versus what you really know. So going back what I said before, I mean I just went too far. So let me show you. Let me share my screen. You see my screen?
Mm-hmm.
You see the far end, there's a small slope here. Right here. You see this
Yeah.
this piece. You see?
Yeah.
Okay. This is Mount Tabor, which is considered as Mount Transfiguration. So when you go to Israel, they will say, "Oh, this is where it happened." So this is Mount Tabor. So you sometimes you go to a restaurant and it says Mount Tabor. That's what that is. So now you know what the Mount Tabor means. Why they actually put the Mount Tabor in a restaurant. All right, so that's the Mount Tabor. This is one possibility. Also, oh, oh, bar. Raise this. Okay, so this is Mount Hermon. This is another place people think that this is the Mount of Transfiguration. Right? Well, of course, it's very different. This Mount Hermon is highest mountain in Israel, and you will see like snows are covered there while other places are not. So you can imagine how high this mountain is compared to other places. This is the highest place. All right. Then why do people think this is the transfiguration? So let's take a look at it. You'll see here. Where is the mount? Hang on. This is not the mountain. Oh, right here. Okay. So when you look at this map here, this is where Mount Hermon is. When you look at it, this is really not in the Israel. When you look at this, it's more close to Syria. This is the land of Syria, right? And then I showed you about the Mount Tabor right here. You see this Mount Tabor right here below, right? So obviously, the distance between Mount Tabor to Mount Hermon is very far apart. Then why do people think? One scholar says Mount Hermon is transfiguration versus Mount Tabor is transfiguration. There's reason. Right before this chapter 17, what happened? When you go back to chapter 16, what happened was, when you look at the verse 13, now when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, and this is where Jesus spoke to his disciple. Look where the Caesarea Philippi is. Right here. Right? So 6 days later, right, Jesus must have went up to Mount Hermon. Rather than he was here and traveled all the way down to go to Mount Tabor. Right? So this is why many of the people think the Mount Hermon was the Transfiguration. Because it's close to Caesarea Philippi versus Mount Tabor. So, which one's right? Nobody knows. Obviously, we don't know. But you will hear some people say Mount Hermon is Transfiguration Mountain. Some say Mount Tabor is the Transfiguration. But when you go to Israel, this is what you will see as Mount of Transfiguration. This is where people will take you up there and then show you the great church on top of the mountain and say, wow, this is what happened. Then people will take a picture. Wow, this is what happened. Yeah. So I just want you to know what you will see when you go there. Right?
Okay, I just wanted to know on what ground do you think Mount Tabor is from Transfiguration? Consider the distance.
Not a whole lot. Not a whole lot.
Just arbitrarily decided.
Yeah. Because most of Jesus' ministry happened, around this Tiberia area. So since most of Jesus' ministry happened in this area, this is the closest mountain. So this must be happened at Mount Tabor rather than up here.
Mm-hmm. You could see Nazareth on the map closest to Mount Tabor.
Yeah.
So that would make sense. I get it.
Right? So other than that, there's not a whole lot of basis why Mount Tabor is the actual Mount of Transfiguration. So let me see if I can show you. So let me just share my screen again. You see my screen?
Mm-hmm.
So this is the top of the mountain Tabor. So you see this church?
Wow.
This is the Transfiguration Church at the top of the mountain of Tabor. So this is where people go and take picture. And this is the church. So at least you get to see what this is. Oh, actually, you know what? Let's actually share the screen one more time. You see this? Mount Tabor is traditional locations or earliest identification of the Mount of Transfiguration as Tabor is by Origen in the 3rd centuries and is also mentioned in Saint Cyril of Jerusalem and Saint Jerome in the 4th century. It is later mentioned in the 5th century. So that's what they decide. This is Transfiguration. And you'll see there's a Mount Hermon as well, right? So there's many different suggestions about where is the Transfiguration Mountain. Is it important? No, it is not important. But at least when you actually go to Israel, so know what you're seeing and what you're going to be actually, considering. So coming back, chapter 17 again. Now, when Jesus took 3 of his disciples up to the mountain to pray there. When he took them up there, and Jesus was transfigured before them, and his face shone like the light, the sun's, and his clothes became white as light. So literally, Jesus turned and transfigured, and then turned to like almost a light, and his clothes changed as white as light. And then there's two other men appear. It was Moses and Elijah talking with him. And we talked about this, a few weeks ago. Obviously, those three disciples have never seen Elijah or Moses, right? There's no such thing as a portrait. They saw what Moses or Elijah looked like. But when they saw their two men appeared, they knew one was Moses, the other one was Elijah. The question is, how did they know? How did they know there was one was Moses and one was Elijah? Like, imagine, the person you read in your history book 1,000 years ago, and then all of a sudden the guy appeared. Oh, that's him, right? You exactly know who that person is. How were they able to identify one was Moses and the other one was Elijah? Right? This is something most people don't really question. Oh, it must be they must have known. But when you think about it, when you actually put yourself in their shoes, there's no way they would have known this. Obviously, but they knew exactly one was Moses and one was Elijah. Now, here's the question. I always ask a question. Why Moses and why Elijah? Out of many, famous characters or figures in Old Testament, out of many people, why Moses? Why Elijah? Period. Can you think about it? And why?
I'll take a guess. 100% guess.
Are you good at guess?
I think so. This is 100,000% guess.
Okay.
Moses?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe he's the law.
There's a law.
Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Like literally the first time we get God's law.
Mm-hmm.
Elijah?
Mm-hmm.
God fulfilling promise.
God fulfilling promise.
That's
Okay.
it.
I think that's a very, very fair guess.
Thank you.
How about others?
Well, I think I don't know which question should be asked first. Because if you ask why is Moses and Elijah, and you get the answer, then the answer to the second question would be the only choice that Peter and other people have to have. Like, why? And then, okay, there has to be Moses and Elijah.
Okay.
So I honestly think, in fact, I think on the same token, I was always curious, like, how did we know so much about what happened with the Jesus through the three books that describe? So that's the same question I have, like just the same question as you asked. How did they know it's Moses and Elijah? And same thing here. What makes Mark, Luke know so much about what happened and in such great detail? Is that the same type of the question?
The question is more about why Moses and Elijah appeared, not like Abraham. Why not David? Why not Samuel? Why not all of the people that we saw in the Old Testament? Why Moses and Elijah appeared is the question. Is there any reason that only those two people showed up out of the many people that we have seen in the Old Testament?
I'm going to assume that Moses represents something and Elijah represents something else.
And if it is, what is it?
I like what Inky said. It makes sense with the law, because Moses was the one that, put the tablets and everything. It was the start of God's law. So I agree with the law, but Elijah, I'm not sure what he would represent, I guess.
Okay. So, I mean, good guess. Good guess. So let's kind of like talk about this a little more. As you pointed out, Moses literally represent law. The first 5 books, Genesis through Deuteronomy, it's called Book of Moses. And at the same time, Book of Law. All Israelites, they follow the law of Moses. So Moses represent law. And it's no doubt that until today, it's always Moses been portrayed as person of the law. He's the one who actually received the law from God, and he's the one who presented to all the Israelites. And they've been following until today, and they will continue to follow. So Moses represents law. And second, Elijah. Moses was a little easy. We got that. Okay, so he represents the law, so we understand. But what about Elijah? What did Elijah do?
Why not Elisha?
Yeah.
Why Elijah?
What did he do? What did Elijah do?
I sense we're going to go back and turn back to the Bible.
Yes, we're going to go back. But everybody knows who Elijah is. So what did he do? So let's go to 1 King. First King chapter 18. 1 Kings chapter 18. So, during the time of Elijah, there was great famine. And obviously, rain stopped. So there was no rain. And then people are suffering. And they decide to determine who is real God. So Elijah versus 850, when you turn to chapter 18, let's just take a look at this. After many days, the word of the Lord came to Elijah in the third year, saying, Go show yourself to Ahab, and I will send rain upon the earth. So Elijah went to show himself to Ahab. Now the famine was severe in Samaria, and Ahab called Obadiah, who was over the household. Now Obadiah feared the Lord greatly. And when Jezebel cut off the prophet of the Lord, Obadiah took 100 prophets and hid him by 50s in the cave and fed them with bread and water. And Ahab said to Obadiah, Go through the land to all the spring of waters and to all the valley. Perhaps we may find grass and save the horses and mules alive and not lose some of the animals. So they divided the land between them to pass through it. Ahab went in one direction by himself, and Obadiah went in another direction by himself. And as Obadiah was on the way, behold, Elijah met him, and Obadiah recognized him and fell on his face and said, Is it you, my lord Elijah? And he answered him, It is I. Go, tell your lord, behold, Elijah is here. And he said, How have I sinned that you would give your servant into the hand of Ahab to kill me? As the Lord your God lives, there is no nation or kingdom where my Lord has not sent to seek you. And when they would say, He is not here, he would take an oath of the kingdom of nation that they had not found you. And now you say, Go tell your Lord, behold, Elijah, he's here. And as soon as I have gone from you, the Spirit of the Lord will carry you, I know not where. And so when I come and tell Ahab, and he cannot find you, he will kill me. Although I your servant, have feared the Lord from my youth. Has it not been told, my Lord, what I did when Jezebel killed the prophet of the Lord? How I hid 100 men of the Lord prophets by 50 in a cave and fed them with bread and water? And now you say, Go tell your Lord, behold, Elijah is here, and he will kill me. And Elijah said, As the Lord of hosts lives, before whom I stand, I will surely show myself to him today. So Obadiah went to meet Ahab and told him, and Ahab went to meet Elijah. When Ahab saw Elijah, Ahab said to him, Is it you, a troubler of Israel? And he answered, I have not troubled Israel, but you have, and your father's house, because you have abandoned the commandments of the Lord and followed the Baal. Now therefore send and gather all Israel to me at Mount Carmel, and 450 prophets of Baals and 400 prophets of Azra, who ate at Jezebel's table. So Ahab sent to all the people of Israel and gathered the prophets together at Mount Carmel. And Elijah came near to all the people and said, How long will you go limping between two different opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him, but if Baal, then follow him. And the people did not answer him a word. Then Elijah said to the people, I only am left the prophet of the Lord, but Baal's prophets are 400 men. Let 2 bulls be given to us, and let them choose 1 bull for themselves, and cut it in piece, and I laid it on the wood, but put no fire to it. And I will prepare the other bulls, and laid it on the wood, and put it on fire to it. No fire to it. And you call upon the name of your God, and I will call upon the name of the Lord, and the God who answered by fire, he is God. And all the people answered, It is well spoken. Elijah said to the prophet of Baal, Choose for yourself 1 bull, and prepare it first, for you are many, and called upon the name of your God, but put no fire to it. And they took the bull that was given them, and they prepared it, and called upon the name of Baal from morning until noon, saying, O Baal, answer us. And but there was no voice, and no one answered. And they limped around the altar and they had made. And at noon Elijah mocked them, saying, Cry aloud, for he is God. Either he is musing, or he is relieving himself, or he is on a journey, or perhaps he is asleep and must be awakened. And they cried aloud and cut themselves after their customs with swords and lances, until the blood gushed out upon them. And as midday passed, they raved on until the time of the offering of oblations, but there was no voice. No one answered, no one paid attention. Then Elijah said to all people, Come near to me. And all the people came near to him, and he repaired the altar of the Lord, and that had been thrown down. Elijah took 12 stones according to the number of the tribes of the sons of Jacob, to whom the word of the Lord came, saying, Israel shall be your name. And with the stones he built an altar in the name of the Lord, and he made a trench about the altar as great as would contain two set of seed, and he poured contained two set of he put the wood in order that put the bull in pieces and laid it on the wood. And he said, fill your jars with waters and poured it on the burnt offering and on the wood. And he said, do it a second time. And they did it a second time. And he said, do it a third time. And they did it at a third time. And the water ran around an altar and filled trench also with water. And at the time of offering of the oblations, Elijah the prophet came near and said, O Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known this day that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant, that I have done all things all these things at your word. Answer me, O Lord, answer me, that this people may know that you, O Lord, are God, that you have turned your heart back. Then the fire of the Lord fell and consumed the burnt offering and the wood and the stones and the dust, and licked up the water that was in the trench. And then all the prophets saw it, all the people saw it. They fell on their faces and said, The Lord, he is God. The Lord, he is God. And Elijah said to them, Seize the prophet of Baals, let not one of them escape. And they seized them, and Elijah brought them down to the brook Kishon and slaughtered them there. This is the story from Old Testament, as you know. I just read it one more time, the story that you already know. So, after we read the story, I'm going to ask this question again. So, what did Elijah do?
He killed all the bad prophets.
He killed all the Baals and Ashtaroth prophet. Is that all he did? What did he do? I read it. You kind of like read it with your eyes. So we read together. What did he do? Silence?
Just don't want to be wrong, okay?
It's okay to be wrong. It's okay to be wrong. Be courageous.
It's okay. Be wrong so God can be right.
Okay. So when you think about the story that we just read, right? What Elijah did was he wanted to prove who is true God. Right? He wanted to prove who is true God. You guys believed all this Baals and Ashtaroth. Right? I believe in our Lord, our God. Let's find out who is our true God. So all the things that he had done, ultimately what he wanted to prove, who is true God, is what he did. All right? Aside from what he did and how he actually brought the fire from the heavens and burnt this altars with the all this burnt the animals, and how he brought the rain down. Out of all the stories, when you think about the focus of the story, what did he really do? What he did was prove who is true God. That's what he did. So let's focus on this. Going back to the Matthew chapter 17, Moses appeared representing the law of God. Elijah appeared. What did he do? He, as a prophet, to prove who is true God. That's what he did. When you think about his name, Elijah, what does the name of Elijah mean? Elijah.
Elijah.
Well, some of you studied the Old Testament with me. So you should have known what the meaning of Elijah means. Right? So what did you learn from me? If I ever taught you. Did I actually teach anything? Well, obviously, you can just Google it and find out what is Elijah means. Elijah means El. El is what?
God.
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 Elijah who means Jehovah. Meaning, my God is Jehovah. That's what Elijah means. So what he did was, as his name stands, he wanted to prove my God is Jehovah. He wanted to prove who is my God, who is our God. That's what he wanted to prove. That's where name Elijah came from. Elijah was literally representing the prophets of Old Testament to prove who is true God. Okay? Now, let's just put those things aside for a moment. Let's talk a little bit about Moses. Moses was great leader, and he's the one who actually received God's law and gave it to Israel. He's the one who built tabernacles. He led the Israelites out of Egypt and brought them to, front of the promised land. Now, what happened to Moses at the end?
He wasn't permitted to go into the promised land.
Right. He was not permitted to go to promised land, and then he died in front of that promised land. Right? Where did he die?
Was it Mount Hermon?
Mount Hermon?
I know the Lord took him up and showed him the promised land.
Mm-hmm.
But did he take him up on Mount Hermon? That's the question.
So he died, right? Where did he die?
Is it where the transfiguration happened?
I guess we're going to find out. Next question is, who buried him?
Joshua.
Does people know where Moses died? Yes? No? Is it some kind of a trivia?
We can go back. Go back to the Old Testament.
All right, so let's go to Old Testament. So let's find out. Let's go to Deuteronomy. chapter 34. Deuteronomy chapter 34, we're going to read. Then Moses went up from the plain of Moab to Mount Nebo. Okay? So it's not Mount Hermon, it's Nebo. So we know that it's definitely not a Transfiguration Mountain, okay?
Yeah.
To the top of Pisgah, which is opposite Jericho. And the Lord showed him all the land, Gilead as far as Dan, all Naphtali, the land of Ephraim and Manasseh, and all the land of Judah as far as the western sea, the Negev, and the plain, that is, the valley of Jericho, the city of palm trees as far as Zoar. And the Lord said to him, This is the land of which I swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. I will give it to your offsprings. I have let you see it with your eyes, but you shall not go over there. So Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab, according to the word of the Lord, and he buried him in the valley of the land of Moab, opposite Beth Peor, but no one knows the place of his burial to this day. Moses was 120 years old when he died. His eyes was undimmed, and his vigor unabated, and the people of Israel wept before Moses in the plain of Moab 30 days, and the days of weeping and moaning for Moses were ended. Okay, so now he went up to the Mount Nebo, which God showed him all the promised lands that he will give it to the people of Israel. After he saw what the Israelites will receive soon, he died. So, who buried him, and where did he bury him?
Joshua, son of Nun.
Joshua, the son of Nun. Well, that's what we can think of, right?
Mm-hmm.
So who else could bury Moses other than Joshua? Joshua was only person who really just followed Moses, right? Until the last moment. So Joshua must have actually just, buried him. But what really just interesting is, when you look at verse 6, and he buried him in the valley in the land of Moab opposite Beth Peor, but no one knows the place of his burial to this day. Why? Why don't they know?
Maybe because God buried him.
Wasn't there a fight over the body of Moses?
Oh.
Or Satan tried to take the body of Moses? And Gabriel.
Gabriel?
Not Gabriel. Michael. It's the verse where Michael didn't he rebuked Satan.
Well,
So the Lord rebuked you.
What's interesting is we're reading the same Bible. We're reading the same Bible, and we don't know what we're reading here.
Yes.
This is one of those things that people just like read over and they just think, oh, okay, he was buried. They don't like ask who actually buried. We're deep diving right now. Interesting.
He said, when you look at the verse 6, it says, he buried him. So who is he?
Who's he?
Who is he?
Who's him?
Capital H. E.
So we just don't know who the he is. So we could assume that it must be Joshua because we can think of anyone else other than Joshua, right?
Sure.
But if Joshua is the one who buried him, he must know where he buried him.
Right.
So they must know where Moses was buried because he himself buried Moses. But the scripture says nobody knows. So why nobody knows?
Because God buried him.
Exactly. So when you look at the actual the Bible in Hebrew, it says, and he buried, it says, Vahi kabod, meaning va means end. E means God. Kabod, buried. Who buried? God buried him. So he is God. Because when you look at the verse in chapter 34, he spoke to God. God is the one who showed him the promised land. Right? So between Moses and him, and he buried. Who? God buried him. Since God buried him, no one knows where he was buried because no one has seen where he was buried because God buried him. That's why no one knows where he was buried. So no one has seen the death of Moses. No one has seen.
So was it? I'm curious. Just as kind of random. Was it assumed that he just died because he just disappeared? Then he just
From dear Israel's eye, he literally disappeared. Because no one has seen him die.
Hey, no goodbye. That's cold. Very cold.
Yeah, so no one has seen his death. Because God is the only one who buried him. And God is the only who knows where he buried him. So no one, no Israelites, including Joshua, has seen his death. Well, something you didn't know. Now you know. Right?
did we talk about this in Deuteronomy?
Yes. We did.
It's like 6 years ago.
Okay. Now, let's move on to Elijah. Now, this time, let's go to 2 Kings. 2 Kings, we're going to read from verse 1. Now, when the Lord was about to take Elijah up to heaven by a whirlwind, Elijah and Elisha were on their way from Gilgal, and Elijah said to Elisha, "Please stay here, for the Lord has sent me as far as Bethel." But Elisha said, "As the Lord lives, and as you yourself live, I will not leave you." So they went down to Bethel, and the son of the prophets who were in Bethel came out to Elisha and said to him, "Do you know that today the Lord will take away your master from over you?" And he said, "Yes, I know it. Keep quiet." Elijah said to him, "Elisha, please stay here, for the Lord has sent me to Jericho." But he said, "As the Lord lives, and as you yourself live, I will not leave you." So they came to Jericho. The son of the prophets who were at Jericho drew near to Elisha and said to him, "Do you know what today the Lord will take away your master from over you?" And he answered, "Yes, I know it. Keep quiet." Then Elijah said to him, "Please stay here, for the Lord has sent me to Jordan." But he said, "As the Lord lives, and as you yourself live, I will not leave you." So the two of them went on. 50 men of the son of the prophet also went and stood at some distance from them, as they both were standing by the Jordan. And Elijah took his cloth and rolled it up and struck the water, and the water was parted to the one side and to the other, till the two of them could go over on dry ground. When they had crossed, Elijah said to Elisha, ask what I shall do for you before I am taken from you. And Elisha said, Please, let there be a double portion of your spirit on me. And he said, You have asked the hard things. Yet, if you see me as I am being taken from you, it shall be so for you. But if you do not see me, it shall not be so. And they still went on and talked. Behold, chariot of a fire and horses of a fire separated the two of them. And Elijah went up by the whirlwind into heaven, and Elisha saw it, and he cried, my father, the chariot of Israel and its horsemen. And he saw him no more. Then he took hold of his own clothes and tore them in two pieces, and he took up the cloak of Elijah and had fallen from him, and went back and stood on the bank of Jordan. Then he took the cloak of Elijah and that had fallen from him, and struck the waters, saying, Where is the Lord, the God of Elijah? And when he had struck the water was parted to the one side and to the other, and Elisha went over. Now, Elisha saw that God took Elijah. Right? Was Elijah dead? No. So God took him up. Right? Elisha saw him, God taking him up in the whirlwind. So neither Moses or Elijah has a common thing. No one has seen their death. Neither of them has seen death. One was buried by God, the other one was taken up, so no one ever saw their death. That's the common things. Number one, as I mentioned, Moses represent law. Elijah represent a prophet who proved who is true God. Now, let's put this together. Coming back to Matthew chapter 17, why Moses and Elijah had to appear. Now, let's take a look at Matthew chapter 22. Matthew chapter 22. We're going to read from verse 34. But when the Pharisee heard that he had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together, and one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question to test him. Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law? And he said to him, You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your souls, and with all your mind. This is the great and first the commandments, and a second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments depends on the law and the prophet. What is law and the prophet? The two commandments. Two commandment is what? Love your God with all your heart. And then love your neighbor as yourself. These two commandments are summed up from the 10 Commandments. Right? And what does it represent? This represents law and the prophet. Now, this time, let's go to Luke chapter 16. Luke chapter 16. We're going to read from verse 14 and on. The Pharisees, who were lovers of money, heard all these things, and they ridiculed him. And he said to them, "You are those who justify yourself before man, but God knows your heart. For what is exalted among men is an abominations in the sight of God. The law and the prophets were until John. Since then, the good news of the kingdom of God is preached, and everyone forces his way into it. But it is easier for heaven and earth to pass away than for one dot of the law to become void." What did Jesus say? Law and the prophet is up to when? To John. Until John. So what is John? What is John? John is John. What is John? I'm asking a lot of weird questions today. What is John? What do you mean, what is it, John? John is John.
Is he referring to John the Baptist?
John the Baptist, yes.
Yeah.
Cleared the way.
You have to think about what we're sharing today. Matthew chapter 17. It's like a maze, right? I'm lost.
Big puzzle.
I'm lost. Coming back to Matthew chapter 17 again. First, Matthew chapter 17, verse 9 and on. And they were coming down the mountain. Jesus commanded them, "Tell no one the vision until the Son of Man is raised from the dead." And the disciple asked him, "Then why do the scribes say that first Elijah must come?" He answered, "Elijah does come, and he will restore all things. But I tell you that Elijah has already come, and they did not recognize him, but did to him whatever they pleased. So also the Son of Man will certainly suffer at their hands." Then the disciple understood that he was speaking to them of John the Baptist. Now you kind of get some clue. Now, Jesus said, "Law and the prophet until John." Now the law and the prophet cease after John. And going back, when Peter, James, and John was with Jesus, and they saw Moses appear, Elijah appeared, Peter said, "Wow, let me just put up 3 tents. One for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah." Obviously, he has no idea what he was talking about. He just said it because, he's the kind of person he is. Like, he has no idea what he's saying, but he says it anyway. Right? He had no idea what he was talking about, but he said it because he was completely lost what to say. And then, while they were, wow, Moses, wow, Elijah, what happened? Cloud came over. Right? Cloud came over. And then, verse 5 and says, "He was still speaking when, behold, a bright cloud overshadowed them, and a voice from the cloud said, 'This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him.'" So, before we talk about this one, when Elijah and Moses appeared, and they spoke to Jesus, right? They spoke to Jesus. What did they were talking about? What did they talk? They spoke to each other. Did they? Did they talk to each other, or?
They began talking with Jesus, but they don't say what they were speaking of.
Yeah?
Somebody saying, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Wow, you look great.
He's like, all right, guys, here's the game.
You look awesome today. How are you? You've been dead for 1,000 years. So are you okay? All right, let's go to Luke chapter 9. I surely read this with you. Luke chapter 9, verse 30. And behold, two men were talking with him, Moses and Elijah, who appeared in glory and spoke of his departure, which is he was about to accomplish at Jerusalem. Aha. There was a topic, what they were talking about. Obviously, they weren't saying, hello, hi, you look awesome. That's not what they were talking. They were talking about the departure. He's talking about what Jesus will do in Jerusalem. What will he be doing?
Save the world.
Death of Jesus Christ and the resurrection. They were talking about death and the resurrection. That's what Moses and Elijah and Jesus was talking about, what Jesus will do soon in Jerusalem. So they were talking about the death of Jesus Christ and the resurrection of Jesus Christ is what they were talking among themselves. Now, here's another story that we need to talk about. Now, I asked you before, no, I didn't ask you this, since I asked too many questions. So, what you will find here is, as I told you at the very beginning, Jesus took Peter and James and John. Those three disciples were with Jesus in this book of the gospel. There are a few events that occurred when those three disciples were with Jesus. What event can you think of when they were with Jesus? Can you think of anything? When were they with Jesus? Those three. I'm asking a lot of hard questions today. Let's find out. Let's go to Mark. Just 1 second. Let's turn to Mark chapter 5. We're going to read from verse 35. While he was still speaking, there came from the ruler's house some who said, "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further, but overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the ruler of the synagogue, "Do not fear, only believe." And he allowed no one to follow him except Peter and James and John, the brother of James. They came to the house of the ruler of the synagogue, and Jesus saw commotions, people weeping and wailing loudly. And when he had entered, he said to them, "Why are you making a commotions and weeping? And child is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him, but he put them all outside and took the child's father and mother and those who were with him and went in where the child was. Taking her by the hands, he said to her, "Talitha cumi," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, arise." And immediately the girl got up, began walking, for she was 12 years of age, and they were immediately overcome with amazement. And he strictly charged them that no one should know this, and he told them to give her something to eat. Right. So those three disciples was with Jesus when the man of a synagogue, which is Jairus, he took Jesus and his three disciples to his house when his daughter was laid down and she was dead. And everyone was weeping and they were crying. Jesus took his disciples, three of those disciples, with the man of a synagogue and his wife. They got into the room and raised the girl from the dead. So, what were they doing? They were at the place where there was death and resurrection. Right? Girl was dead, and Jesus raised her from death. So those three disciples was with Jesus when Jesus was dealing with death and resurrection. Second times, when Jesus took those three again to the Mount Figuration, what they heard was what Jesus will do, which is how he will die and how he will raise from death. And there's another place where those three disciples were there. When were they with Jesus? Huh?
Lazarus.
Nazareth?
Oh, Lazarus. The death of Lazarus, resurrection of Lazarus.
No.
No.
Good guess.
I guess Last Supper.
Of course, all disciples were there with the Last
Oh,
Supper.
just the three.
Just the three. Just the three. When were they? When Jesus prayed at the Gethsemane. All right? When Jesus was praying right before his death, he took those three disciples when he was praying at the Gethsemane. Those are the three places where Jesus specifically took those three disciples out of other disciples. What is all related? It's about the death and the resurrection. So those three disciples saw Elijah and Moses, right? They're they keep seeing and hearing about death and the resurrection, of literally representing and hinted what Jesus will do. And that's what they heard at the Mount Figuration. And then, when those two individuals, which is Moses and Elijah, appeared, and cloud came over, they heard a voice. This is my beloved son. Listen to him. And then when the cloud disappeared, what happened? What happened?
They were terrified.
Coming back to Matthew 17 again. We're going to read from verse 5 again. He was still speaking when, behold, a bright cloud overshadowed them, and a voice from the cloud, This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him. When the disciples heard this, they fell on their face and were terrified. But Jesus came and touched them, saying, Rise and have no fear. And when they lifted up their eyes, they saw no one but Jesus only. They saw Moses and Elijah with Jesus. After a cloud came over and overshadowed them, they heard a voice from heaven. This is my beloved Son. I'm well pleased. Listen to him. And then when the clouds was lifted up, they could not see Elijah nor Moses anymore. They disappeared. What they saw was only Jesus. This is the key. What did they see? Only Jesus. Let me sum it up and put it all together for you now and summarize everything. Put the puzzles back in. For everything what I just mentioned, because I told you about the pieces here, there, right? We need to put all this together. So, to sum it up, why Moses and Elijah appeared when they went up to the Mount Transfiguration. It appeared with Moses and Elijah because they were the one who representing law and the prophet. Law and the prophet ends until John the Baptist came. Everyone, the Israelites, were busy keeping the law and the prophet's message until that time. Jesus showed to those three disciples who kept seeing the death and the resurrection of Jesus Christ, showing them, I am the one who now closes one chapter, which is the Old Testament. Old Testament is about the book of law and prophets is no longer valid. New promise has come. What is it? Jesus. My death and my resurrection will save you, not by keeping the book of Moses or listening to what prophet says. Because what Moses said, what prophet said in Old Testament, talking about me. It was about me, and I came. So, Moses and Elijah disappeared. It ended here now. The new chapter has begun. It's me. So, going back to Luke, no, not Luke, John chapter 24. Luke chapter 24. We're going to read from verse 13. That very day, two of them were going to a village named Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem, and they were talking with each other about all three things that had happened. While they were talking and discussing together, Jesus himself drew near and went with them. But their eyes were kept from recognizing him, and he said to them, "What is this conversations that you are holding with each other as you walk?" And they stood still, looking sad. Then one of them, named Cleopas, answered him, "Are you the only visitor of Jerusalem who does not know the things that have happened there in these days?" And he said to them, "What things?" And they said to him, "Concerning Jesus of Nazareth, the man who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how our chief priests and rulers delivered him up to the condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Yet, and besides all this, it is now the third day since these things happened. Moreover, some women of our company amazed us. They were at the tomb early in the morning, and when they did not find his body, they came back saying that they had even seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the woman had said, but him they did not see. And he said to them, "O foolish ones, and slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Was it not necessary that the Christ should suffer these things and enter into his glory?" And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them in all the scriptures the things concerning himself. What is it? The law and a prophet was all talking about Jesus Christ. Israel was all about law and the prophets. When they were amazed about the law and the prophets, they've been talking about it, they've been just practicing it, they all did what they had to do up to that point. But when Jesus took those three disciples up to the Mount of Transfiguration, they saw Moses, which represent the law. They saw Elijah represent the prophets. They were amazed. But what Jesus wanted to show them, law and a prophet, is nothing more than showing Jesus Christ, which is who I am with you now. Moses and Elijah had to be disappear. What's left? Only Jesus. That's what they saw in the Mount of the Transfiguration. It's not about, oh, Jesus turned himself into a really bright white clothes with the light visions. No, it's got nothing to do with it. What is really important? Law and a prophet is no more. Law and a prophet was talking about Jesus Christ. I am here, and I'm going to die, and I'm going to resurrect. That is the salvations that you all receive soon. That's what Jesus wanted to show to these three disciples. This is why after they saw, when you're coming back to chapter 17, right? Verse 8, one more time. And when they lifted up their eyes, they saw no one but Jesus only. They were worshiping Moses. They were worshiping Elijah. What Jesus was showed to them, that's not important. That's not the true message that we wanted to show you. I am. Remember, I asked this question multiple times in the past. Why are we always talking about Jesus? When we come to Key's Bible sharing, he talks about nothing but Jesus. No matter what chapter, what books he talks, he only talks about Jesus Christ. Why? It's very simple. This is exactly what Jesus said. I'm the way and the truth and alive. No one can come to Father except through me. Because we cannot go to Father unless we go through Jesus as the gate. There's no other way. That's what the Bible is. Keep talking. That is the focus. So if you take Jesus out of our conversation, that means we're talking something completely different. This is why Jesus has to be the focus of our Bible share. Whichever chapter we turn to, whichever story that we share. Because the death of the Jesus Christ and the resurrection, our faith and our salvation now holds the value. Now we receive eternity. So, only Jesus. And then they kept talking about, right after they came down, they kept talking about, verse 9 says, wait a second. As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus commanded them, tell no one the vision until the Son of Man is raised from the dead, which is what he just showed them. But then they said, the disciple asked them, then why do the scribe says that first must come, Elijah must come? They're going back to Elijah again. And what did Jesus say? Elijah does come, and he will restore all things. But I tell you that Jesus has already come, and they did not recognize him, but did to him whatever they pleased. So also the Son of Man will certainly suffer at their hand. Then the disciple understood that he was speaking of them, of John the Baptist. So, they're saying, why did scribe say Elijah must come? Did Elijah come?
Yes,
Yes?
as a prophet, which is representing all the prophets before Jesus.
Well, not at the
Right.
Mount of Transfigurations, because
Yeah.
this is what the disciple asked Jesus. Why then? Why do the scribe says first Elijah must come? Did Elijah come? Not to the disciples. Did Elijah come?
Jesus said he already came. Right?
Well, Jesus
And
said
they
he.
didn't recognize him.
Yeah, Jesus
What are you
said.
talking about? What are you talking about, John the Baptist, though? But John the Baptist was that person.
But they were waiting for who?
Elijah.
They were waiting for Elijah,
Uh-huh.
right? Scribers and all Israel was waiting for the Elijah to come. So the question is, did Elijah come? Once again, go back to Matthew chapter 9 for a second. Mark chapter 9, we're going to read verse 11 and 12.
Matthew or Mark?
Mark. And they asked him, why do the scribes say that the first Elijah must come? And he said to them, Elijah does come first to restore all things, and how it is written of the Son of Man that he could suffer many things and be treated with contempt. But I tell you that Elijah has come, and they did to him whatever they pleased, as it is written of him. Did the Old Testament say Elijah will come?
Oh, I don't know.
Did the Bible say Elijah will come?
What is Bible?
Yes, it does. Because the disciple said, they asked why the scribe said Elijah must first come.
Right. This is what they were waiting. They were waiting for the Elijah to come. Right? So let's find out what the Old Testament say. Let's go to Malachi. Malachi chapter 4. We're going to read from verse 4. Remember the law of my servant Moses, the statute and the rules that I commanded him at Horeb for all Israel. Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the great and awesome day of the Lord comes, and he will turn the heart of fathers to their children, and the heart of children to their fathers, lest I come and strike the land with decree of utter destruction. This is the prophet, was spoken by the Malachi. But here, when you look at the Malachi, what do you see? Here you see Moses and Elijah again. Right? And he says, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the great and awesome day of the Lord to come. So, once again, it is the physical Elijah will come, or when you look at verse 6, he will turn the heart of fathers of their children and the heart of children of their fathers, lest I come and strike the land with a decree of utter destruction. Which means when Elijah comes, he will come to do something. What he will do, he will come and turn the children of Israel to who? To Father. Elijah pulled the fire from heaven. He had done immaculate things. Is that what John the Baptist do? No, John the Baptist didn't perform any miracle. But he did one thing. He paved the road to Jesus Christ. Turned Israel's heart and led them to Jesus Christ. What does that mean? When John the Baptist saying, repent, the kingdom of heaven is near. The one who comes after me, he's the one, not me. So, John the Baptist led the Israelites to Jesus so they can get to the Father. Because through Jesus, they can finally get to the Father. But they were stuck in their mind and said, wait a second. Well, I thought Elijah will have to come. He did come.
Yeah.
That was John the Baptist. That's why he led you to me. So that you can get to the Father. And Father to you. This is what the story of the Transfiguration.
I thought, I was just trying to connect. I thought Elijah, the Old Testament, all the people were just common knowledge. They said, oh, Elijah has to come back. And then I thought Elijah represented just the, prophets in general. And John the Baptist was the last one, which was Elijah coming.
But going back to what I said before, what did Elijah do? He was proving who is true God.
Right. His name, right. Elijah means.
So what did the John the Baptist do? He was proving who is true God.
Yeah, got it.
So that's what happened, and that's the story of the Transfiguration. But many people missing the real points here in this story. The only thing they remember is, 3 of the disciples went up to Mountain of Transfiguration with Jesus. They saw Jesus was turning into a really just bright white clothes with the lighting, the radiating lights.
Nice story. Nice bedtime.
And then talking about Mount Tabor versus Mount Hermon. But that's not the point. That's not the point. The point here is that Jesus Christ is true God. And through his death and resurrection, we finally close one chapter, the law and the prophets. Now the true gospel has come. The good news has come that through his death and resurrection, we will receive the salvations, and there is a pathway to get to the Father now. That's the whole story of the transfiguration. That's the point. That's why Moses and Elijah has to be disappeared from the sight. Only Jesus was standing there. Because nothing else is important but Jesus. I only talked about the Mount of Transfiguration, but the
Amen.
and
That's
2
one of
hours.
the- I feel like that's one of the most important chapters that we read, honestly, so far.
Mhm.
It's big, especially like when you don't understand it, like you're missing what the Bible's all about. So it's very big. And I think another is Bible sharing. So I'm going to share. I feel like also, I don't know if it was the Mark version or the Luke version. It said that his like clothes were like bleached, like they couldn't be bleached like on Earth, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
It's referencing that again. Jesus had to be the perfect, blameless white sheep that because you can't perfect yourself here on Earth. You fall short every single time.
Right.
Jesus is the only one that can do that. That's why he is the person that is the Messiah.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that you need to think about is why Jesus actually turned into a really bright white cloth. Why does it have to be actually like shown that bright white clothes? So when you think about it, when Jesus is coming back, right?
Mm-hmm.
What kind of clothes will he be wearing?
Bright white.
White. What does that white clothes represent? Righteousness. When you think about the tabernacle, right? The tent was covered with white linen, which represent righteousness. He is the only righteous. No one else. So you kind of put all these stories together, and story from Old Testament, New Testament, put it all together to get this message. This is why we need to understand the Bible as a whole, not as a sections, not as a piece of books, but you need to be able to really see things from macro view to able to understand the micro view of the story.